Hello, I'm continuing my reviews on the Phantasm series with Phantasm IV, Oblivion. Now, Oblivion is, of course, the fourth film in the Phantasm series. Now, this is written and directed by Don Coscarelli, who also wrote and directed the first three movies in this series. Now, Roger Avary, who directed films like Killin' Zoe and The Rules of Attraction, which of course was the adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel, and he also co-wrote Pulp Fiction with Quentin Tarantino, he apparently is a huge Phantasm fan, and he actually wrote a script for a Phantasm movie set in a post-apocalyptic future where the Toll Man actually does wipe out most of the human race, and apparently he was planning on writing and directing the film, and apparently Bruce Campbell was actually going to be in it. So Don Coscarelli decided to make this film as kind of like a bridge between Phantasm III and this post-apocalyptic Phantasm movie that Roger Avary was planning on doing. So, this movie was really made as a big setup for something a lot bigger and a lot more epic, and you can kinda tell that watching the movie that this film is really just a prologue to something a lot bigger and a lot better, which of course never actually got made. And this film has a significantly lower budget than Phantasm 2 and 3 did, and you can kinda tell that as well watching the movie. Now, I actually do like this one quite a bit, but it is my least favorite of the Phantasm series so far. I know there is going to be a Phantasm V pretty soon, but I haven't seen that one yet, so out of the ones that have actually came out, this is probably my least favorite of the series. Now, the plot of Phantasm IV is it picks up where Phantasm III left off. Now, in Phantasm III, you realize that the Toll Man was trying to turn Mike into the same type of creature that he is. So, in this movie, Mike is driving out into the desert, and he's slowly transforming into the same type of being that the Toll Man is. So, throughout the film, Mike is starting to develop these supernatural powers, and throughout the film he's being visited by his brother Jody, who has already been transformed into a supernatural entity by the Toll Man. So, in the movie, Reggie is following Mike out into the desert, and Reggie's now trying to help Mike, but as Reggie's following Mike out into the desert, Reggie encounters some of the Toll Man's minions. And that's the basic plot line of Phantasm IV. Now, I actually really do like Phantasm IV Oblivion, even though I do have a lot of problems with it. Now, really my biggest problem with this movie is, now in Phantasm III there was this character named Tim, who was helping Reggie fight the Toll Man in the previous film, and at the end of that movie, you saw Tim get pulled through a window by one of the Toll Man's creatures, and you don't know what happened to him. And in this movie, there's absolutely no mention of Tim whatsoever, and that is something I kind of had a problem with, because Tim, he was a character who you followed throughout most of Phantasm III, and to just kill the character off and not even mention him in this one, once again, it's kind of insulting to the character, and they kind of did the same thing with the character of Liz from Phantasm II with Phantasm III. And this film, it comes off as being somewhat lackluster compared to the first three films. Like, Phantasm II and Phantasm III were really over-the-top movies. This one honestly feels a lot quieter, honestly, which I don't 100% mind. In a way that's actually kind of cool, that this one is a much quieter and much slower paced movie than the previous two films were, but at the same time though, it also kind of feels somewhat lackadaisical compared to the previous two films. But in this movie, they actually do kind of expand a little bit on the Phantasm mythos. For example, in this movie, you actually find out that the Tall Man used to be a human. Basically, in this movie, Jody is taking Mike through those dimensional forks, but it's actually taken Mike throughout time, and there's a part of this movie where Mike goes back in time to the time of the Civil War, and he finds out that the Tall Man used to be a human named Jebediah Morningside. It turns out that this guy Morningside, he was an undertaker, but he also was kind of a scientist, and he created a machine that can actually open up a dimensional gateway, and he went through this dimensional gateway, and when he came back, he was no longer human. So in this movie, you pretty much find out how the Tall Man came to be. Also, in this movie, there's a scene where Mike ends up in this post-apocalyptic future where apparently the Tall Man wiped out the human race, and I think that was supposed to foreshadow this post-apocalyptic Phantasm movie that Roger Avary was going to do. Now, aside from the way they killed off Tim, another problem I have with this movie really is the ending, because this movie, I don't want to give away the ending, but it does kind of just end like that, and at the time I first saw this movie, I didn't realize that this movie was meant to set up a Phantasm V, so at the time I saw this movie, I thought this was like the final film. So I remember when I first saw this movie, and I used to love this movie a lot when I was younger, but even when I first saw this movie, even though I still liked the movie, I was just like, what the fuck was that? But yeah, Phantasm Oblivion, it's certainly not a bad movie, and I actually do like the film a lot, but I do think it's significantly weaker than the other films. Now, they are coming out with a Phantasm V, which is going to be called Phantasm Ravager. Now, I know this one is actually not going to be directed by Don Coscarelli, even though Don Coscarelli is co-writing it. Now, at the time I'm recording this, there is no official release date yet for when Phantasm V is going to come out, but apparently it is going to come out this year. Now, keep in mind, I'm putting this review up in October, but I'm actually recording this in August, so at the time I'm recording this, there has been no release date yet for Phantasm V. Now, I'm both excited, but also a little worried about Phantasm V. Like, I saw the trailer for the movie, and in the trailer there were a lot of shots with, like, CGI blood that looked really fake looking, and there was also this weird image from the trailer of a building being destroyed by a giant sphere, and that just seemed really cheesy and really over the top, and yes, to be fair, the other Phantasm movies were definitely very cheesy and over the top in certain points as well, but that just seems almost too over the top, even for a Phantasm movie. But I'm hoping that Phantasm V at least has a good story where I could maybe forgive some of the bad special effects that might be in it and that really weird-looking giant sphere. Like, as long as there's a good story history behind it, I'm sure I'll be able to forgive some of the negative aspects of that movie. And this Phantasm V movie that's coming out is actually going to be the final film in the series, so I'm hoping that this one does a good job at wrapping up the whole series. Now, I know there's not going to be any other Phantasm movies after this Phantasm V, but one thing that I always thought would be kinda cool, now Don Coscarelli recently wrote and directed the film John Dies at the End, and honestly, I could see the characters from John Dies at the End crossing over into the Phantasm universe, because like in John Dies at the End, those main characters, there were parts of that movie where they entered parallel universes, and I could honestly see the characters from John Dies at the End at one point entering the Phantasm universe, or the characters from the Phantasm universe entering the universe that John Dies at the End takes place in. Like, I could see something like that happening. Like, I know it's never going to happen, but honestly though, I could see something like that happening though. Also, in John Dies at the End, there was a scene where the main characters saw this flying sphere, and now I know John Dies at the End was based on a book, so I don't know if anything like that was in the book, but if it wasn't in the book, you can't tell me that that little scene wasn't some kind of reference or homage to Phantasm. So yeah, that's my review on Phantasm Oblivion, and this ends my series of reviews on the Phantasm movies, at least until Phantasm V comes out, and bye.